Good evening, everyone. I'm Robin Crabtree. I'm the Dean of the Bellarmine College of Liberal Arts here, and it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome you to Loyola Marymount University, to all of those who don't work, teach, or study here. Happy to see some students. I bring not only a welcome from the Bellarmine College of Liberal Arts, but a welcome from our university president, Timothy Law Snyder, who's at another event across campus this evening, as well as our provost, Thomas Poon. Everyone is sort of dividing and conquering during April event extravaganza on our campus. Tonight's event has been organized by the Huffington Ecumenical Institute as one of the many annual activities the Institute hosts in fulfilling its mission as envisioned by our benefactor, Mr. Michael Huffington. If you will. Who recognized that ecumenism is an integral part of both the College of Liberal Arts and Loyola Marymount University's commitments to interreligious and interfaith study and dialogue. Sometimes as a faculty member, we think about the interplay of theory and practice, and in this way, the Huffington Ecumenical Institute has both dimensions. The promotion of ecumenism is the primary mission of the Huffington Ecumenical Institute, which was established by Mr. Huffington and reflects his vision about Christian unity. This event, this inaugural annual Michael Huffington Lecture, is a significant contribution towards the fulfillment of that vision. The annual lecture is a major event at the university, and it showcases the possibilities of the Institute and its growing role on the stage of global ecumenism. As diverse and truly ecumenical places, Los Angeles in general, and LMU in particular, are fitting locations to host this evening's program. While LMU is a Catholic university in the Jesuit and Marymount traditions, it's welcoming to students, faculty, staff, and inquiry related to all the world's religious traditions. And being a Jewish dean at this Catholic university is further evidence of that. Our faculty, some of whom are with us this evening, contribute to the richness of these academic dialogues, facilitate meaningful educational experiences for our students, and often engage as public intellectuals and community resources related to their expertise and ecumenical and interfaith issues. Every Loyola Marymount University student takes at least 2 courses in theological studies. We guide our students in developing religious literacies, interfaith competencies, and ecumenical sensibilities, even as we hope they grow in the knowledge of their own faith traditions and in the deepening of their own spiritual commitments. Tonight's event is but one part of that education, and a very special one. I want to welcome all the undergraduate and graduate students. I see a lot of undergraduates over here. You're always in the back pews. But we're very happy to see you here. You should know, students, that this is an extraordinary occasion, and I hope that by the end of it you'll realize you were at kind of an historic occasion due to our special guest. It's a true and deep honor to welcome here in California and tonight at LMU the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches, which is the largest and most important interreligious organization in the world today. So students, it's like having the Secretary General of the UN here, only the religious version of that. I just want you to know how significant this is. I will let the director of the Huffington Institute do the introduction and the descriptions of the program and so on. But as ever, I want to recognize and personally thank Mr. Huffington for his vision that gave rise to the Institute, and also in collaboration with Father John Bacchus, who is here somewhere, of St. Sophia Church downtown, for leadership and engagement in ecumenism across many dimensions, certainly of Michael's own life and philanthropy, and we're honored to be part of that journey. There's an incredible presence and participation tonight from church leadership across denominations and organizations, and I'd like to formally welcome you all. And again, students, I want you to hear who's present tonight. And you can, smile and wave as I call your name. Bishop Juan Carlos Mendez from Churches in Action, a Catholic organization. Pastor Karen Erickson, About Our Father's Business. Is Karen here? Archbishop Hogan Derderian from the Armenian Apostolic Church. Reverend Rafat Girgis, Presbyterian Church of the United States. Archbishop Benjamin of the Orthodox Church in America, Diocese of the West. Rabbi Mark Diamond, who, by the way, teaches in LMU's Jewish Studies program and also for the Academy of Jewish Religions, Southern California. You know, I sometimes accidentally call him Father Diamond or Father Mark. And then I realize, I've been in Catholic education so long that I'm even forgetting my own. Bishop Guy Irwin of the Lutheran Church. Bishop John Taylor of the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles. People are still coming in and still standing at that darn parking ticket thing. Ovidiu Drahora of the Romanian Evangelical Church. Maybe, parking lot. Gabriel Meyer, Executive Director of the Southern California Christian Forum. Right Reverend Franklin Brookhart, retired Episcopal Bishop. Did I meet you earlier today? Maybe not.
He had cataract surgery, so he didn't get to come.
Oh, well, you'll share our greetings. Sylvia Salazar, head of the Native American Concerns in the Archdiocese.
She's hung up in an accident on the freeway.
And so you have come?
Yes. No, I'm here separately.
With her, okay.
Just as a friend.
Yeah, being in traffic is basically de rigueur. It's like you have to have about 10% of people in traffic. Deacon Tom Conchitas, Catholic Diocese of Orange. Ecumenical Commission. Tim Compton, Disciples of Christ. Phil and Artemis Tamouche, the Antiochian Orthodox Church. And of course, Bishop Abraham of the Coptic Church, not here yet. And then Bishop Marianne Swenson of the Methodist Church, who will be on our panel tonight. And Father Alexi Smith, the Director of Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs for the LA Diocese. He's a rock star, everybody knows. He'll also be on the panel. So with no further ado, it's my honor to introduce Father Cyril Hoveroon, the director of the Huffington Ecumenical Institute, whose own tireless ecumenical work has taken him literally to every corner of the globe just in the last couple of months, still leaving him time to teach our students, and he will introduce tonight's program. Thank you so much for coming, and please enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Robin, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming, for joining us for this important event. It's really important for LMU. It is important for Southern California. It is important for the United States, and I think it is important for the global ecumenical community. Just, I want to let you know that this event is being broadcast live stream through the channels of LMU, but also it is available through the website of the World Council of Churches, and that is really a crowded place. So a lot of people watch us globally nowadays, this presentation. I will say a few words more about this presentation, meaning later on. Before I go to presenting our today's speaker, I want to say a few words about the structure of our meeting here. So first we'll have a lecture by Olaf Fykse, the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches. Then after that we have two distinguished panelists who will engage in discussion with Olaf. They will reflect on his presentation. After that, you will have a chance to ask your questions to Olaf. For that reason, each of you has a piece of paper on your seat, and you can write down your questions, then handle them, give them to Margaret or someone else, Nina, also Margaret mostly. She will bring the questions to us. We will accumulate them and then ask them to Olaf in the end. I don't promise that we will ask all the questions that you'll pose, but we'll do our best to, in order to fit our program, to deliver your concerns and to ask your questions to Olaf. After that, we'll have a reception. So don't leave us. Stay with us. Just go to the next space, and there will be plenty of food and drinks, actually, for you to enjoy. So that's the practicalities, and now I'd like to introduce to you Reverend Dr. Olaf Fykse, the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches. Let me show you a few pictures about him and say a few words about his distinguished career. As you probably can guess from his name and surname, he is Scandinavian. He's from Norway, and he was a devoted member. He is still a devoted member of the Church of Norway, which is a Lutheran church, and he served in different positions in that church. Primarily as a parish pastor. He is still a parish pastor, and this pastoral work I think is important for him. He also had some important administrative positions in the Church of Sweden, like he was the secretary of the Church of Norway, of course, secretary for the Church of Norway Doctrinal Commission, and the secretary for the church-state relations for the same church. Olaf was also deeply involved in the dialogues, ecumenical dialogues, even before he took his position in Geneva at the World Council of Churches. He was a General Secretary of the Church of Norway Council on Ecumenical and International Relations. He was a co-chair of the Palestine-Israel Ecumenical Forum Core Group. And I should say that the Palestinian-Israel issue is very much important for him. He's still very much involved in the discussions and the peacemaking process in the Holy Land. He also was a moderator of the Church of Norway and Islamic Council of Norway, as well as the Church of Norway and Jewish Congregation contact groups. So he was deeply involved in the interreligious dialogue. In 2009, he was elected the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches, which is really the top executive position in this organization. And this is his second term as a General Secretary. He was re-elected in 2014. I should say a few words about the World Council of Churches, because maybe some of you, especially students, even though I try to explain to my students what is the organization, but maybe some students and some people don't have a very clear idea about this organization. This is actually the largest ecumenical network in the world. It is the broadest and most inclusive among the many organized expressions of modern ecumenical movement. It is really huge. It's a huge network. It brings together over 350 churches, denominations and church fellowships from more than 110 countries and territories throughout the world. And it represents effectively around 500 million Christians worldwide. I should say that the Catholic Church is not a member of the World Council of Churches, but it is a very active partner of the WCC, and I wish that all the partners, all the members of the WCC had the same kind of cooperation with each other as the Catholic Church has with the World Council of Churches. Today,
Amen.
Today, it should be said that most member churches, even though the World Council of Churches was established in Amsterdam in 1948 and initially comprised mostly the churches from the global north, nowadays most churches come from the global south. And the work of the organization is really focused on the countries from the global south. And I know that Olaf travels a lot, really a lot, much more than me, to the countries in that part of the world. Olaf was really a visionary. He is still a visionary for the work of the World Council of Churches. This organization expresses itself and programs its work for future through its fora. And under Olaf's tenure, there were some important ecumenical fora that took place. Like, for instance, the International Ecumenical Peace Convocation in Kingston, Jamaica in 2011, then the largest ecumenical event ever, the hugest one among all other ecumenical events, the General Assembly of the World Council of Churches. The 10th Assembly took place in Busan in the Republic of Korea in 2013, and it was very much on the shoulders of Olaf, and it was a huge, huge event. Then the Conference on World Mission and Evangelism in Arusha in Tanzania, which took place last year, 2018. Those are only major, really huge convocations. There are minor, well, as it were, fora and meetings that happen on the everyday basis, and Olaf has to attend all of them, well, many of them, to be an active part in them, and this is a very hard and amazing work that he does. Well, he also tries to be in touch personally with the leaders of the church, and this is a part of his job, to be in touch with the leadership. Well, in the last days I was asked, who is Olaf? I usually explain to people that he is the guy to whom the Pope comes. And actually that's exactly what happened when the Pope visited the headquarters of the WCC in Geneva, I think last summer, right? And also visited the Ecumenical Institute in Bossey, and you can see a picture of Olaf with the Pope. Olaf also visits the primates of the church, and when we had the conversation with him yesterday, he explained to me that he tries to be in touch personally with every single primate of the church. So he visits the churches, he tries to be in personal touch and tries to deliver, to convince people to be engaged in the ecumenical movement on a personal basis. So you see a couple of pictures, but only a couple from many other occasions and opportunities that Olaf has to encounter the leadership of the churches. The one is with the ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, the other one is the recent one with the Patriarch of Moscow, for instance. So it's a lot of work indeed, and we are very difficult people to deal with, especially in the traditional churches, so congratulations on this work. Olaf also is actively involved in the peacemaking and reconciliation process. He serves, for instance, on the board of the directors of the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. This is a very important organization that deals with all sorts of violence that the children face, and it's very important from the perspective of social justice and the challenges that the churches face nowadays. He's also a co-president of the Religions for Peace, an important organization, interreligious organization. He is, well, speaking from the Eastern Christian perspective, he should be praised for his many achievements as a person in touch and in collaboration with the churches in the Middle East. Like for that reason, he was, for instance, awarded by King Abdullah II of Jordan with the Al Hussein Decoration for Distinguished Service in the field of interreligious dialogue and cooperation in pursuit of peace among peoples. You know, it's very hard to get awarded in the Middle East. Olaf has been awarded several times. He also received the Friends of the Armenian Award for his advocacy worldwide. I just wanted to emphasize this here in LA, where the Armenian presence is so huge and so important. Well, Olaf is not just, he's not a bureaucrat. He is also a scholar, in addition to being a pastor. He's published several books. Actually, I tried to order, some of his books on Amazon, and I couldn't because they've been sold out. So I just want to highlight some of his publications, 2 of his books, and if you are interested, you can certainly read them. This one, The Truth We Owe Each Other, is based on his doctorate at the Norwegian School of Theology, Mutual Accountability as Ecumenical Attitude. It was published by the WCC Publications in 2016. And then the book, Christian Solidarity in the Cross of Christ, which was also published in Geneva by the WCC in 2012. So that's just a few words. If I wanted to say everything about Olaf's activities and life, we would end exactly before the reception. And I don't want to steal his time. I just want to say that the topic that he wants to present to us today is a reflection of the upcoming General Assembly of the World Council of Churches, which will take place in Karlsruhe in Germany in 2012-21. As I mentioned, the General Assemblies are the most important things in the ecumenical movement, the largest events. And they actually set the agenda for the ecumenical movement, global ecumenical movement, for a decade. This is going to happen. The topic that we will be listening about to Olaf will reflect the future, the path of the ecumenical movement during the next decade, effectively, until early 2030s. So it's really important. You will be probably the first to be introduced to what will be going with the ecumenical movement in the next decade. It's called Christ's Love Moves the World to Reconciliation and Unity. And we are all attention. Olaf, the floor is yours. And let us give a round of applause to Olaf for this.
Thank you, Madam Dean, Mr. Huffington, Father Cyril, all of you, for this invitation and also this great opportunity to discuss what's really on my heart and also what really I think should be our common agenda. Honor to you who give new vital impulses and I would say also invest in the ecumenical work of today. The ecumenical movement is really a movement and it goes in different phases. Something that it has had its glorious heights, I'm not so sure, but there are different times and there are different challenges and there are different issues we have to address. And there is no time to slow down and say, it is well done. It's time to continue. So that's also the theme for tonight. Man's disorder and God's design. That phrase might sound like a description of some political realities of today, quite familiar to some of us. It was, however, the theme for the first assembly of the World Council of Churches in 1948 in Amsterdam. It marked a new beginning in many ways for the churches to meet, to reconcile, and to develop their agenda for unity. They wanted to build serious and also mutual relations. So in the message they concluded, we are committed to stay together. In many ways they said what was said in those times, in many ways, in these post-World War second times, never again. Never again should the world be torn apart by wars. Never again to Nazism, to fascism and their anti-human ideologies. Never again to genocide based on anti-Semitism and racism. Never again should the churches themselves be part of this man's disorder. These events and convictions 70 years ago set agendas in the churches and far beyond that has shaped generations of Christians. As we now prepare this 11th assembly for 2021, we ask, what is it that the churches want to say now? And what is it that the world needs now? Well, the association to a well-known song give us the answer. But it is a profound theological answer as well. namely love. And the first observation for those who know the history of WCC would be that the word love never occurred in any theme of these assemblies so far. But now, Christ's love moves the world to reconciliation and unity. It summarizes our legacy, and it formulates a signal: where are we heading? What will be the focus of our work? It always gives a new tone when these themes are presented. And I would say this one also has an eschatological perspective. It must be a fellowship in the World Council of Churches shaped by faith, moving as pilgrims, humbly but resolutely. It is not a theme for triumphalistic approach, but it is, as we said when Pope Francis visited us last summer in Geneva, it's time for us to be walking, praying and working together. That was a great event. It was a historic, unique moment in our history. And I would say it was a moment when we realized how much this one ecumenical movement actually shares together. It is a common vision, a common ground for the work we do, and also an understanding that our unity must be an expression of the love of Christ poured out in our hearts. Well, this might sound obvious, maybe even a bit naive. Love? Who would not speak of love? Well, it's more into it than that, because the question immediately comes: what does this Christ love means today, in the world as it is today? And further, what does it mean to be a world council of churches with such a theme? Those who know us will know that we always have a critic from both sides. From those who say, you're too much world. You focus on the issues of this world, but not of the church. And others says, are you really relevant for the lives of people of today? Both challenges are needed to be a world council of churches. We are not intending by this theme to boost our self-image, but really to reflect again on what is the biblical mandate for being a fellowship for reconciliation and unity. And what does it mean to share today that God loved and still loves the world? Well, immediately it challenges us to say we cannot ignore. We cannot ignore the polarizing forces of today. We cannot ignore tribalism, racism, nationalism, different forms of exclusivism, if we are to be the followers of Christ in this world. And we have to ask ourselves, how are we fighting against such powers? What does love mean in practice when we face these realities? Is it limited? Our love, is it something to be limited to neighbors in the sense of those who are already within the borders of our country? On the other hand, isn't there some legitimacy in loving our nation, loving the society in which we hope for stability, for economy, for security? These questions are not easy to answer, but even more important. Let me, not as a side step, but as a further step, actually go into my own personal history. I was very honored by what was presented here. But let me share with you something else that have helped me to understand why I find that this theme is what we need to discuss now. And I realize that I've become so old that I start to reflect on my childhood. As a 10-year-old boy, I lived in a parsonage, my father was a pastor, in the rural districts in Norway. I started to discover the public library, and particularly the books about the Second World War that was written about what happened, but also what happened particularly in that region of Norway, which was in the middle of Norway, near Trondheim, where the Germans had a very strategic military interest, but also where the resistance movement had a very strong power to try to do something with, of course, then a very heavy pressure on them from the Nazi regime. So in one of these books, I read about one of the raids, also to my village, seeking out the organized resistance movements. And then I read that they had took the Nazi regime, the German military officers, took the house in which I lived, the parsonage, and confiscated it as the center for their operation, for the interrogation of the suspects. And I read more. One night, one young man from this village was tortured and killed in this house. And from the details written, I saw that this was in the room next to my bedroom. This cruel evil of war and abuse of power in the name of some interest, a certain ideology, a so-called national socialism, with great ambitions on behalf of one nation particularly, but also on what should be our shared ethnicity as white Aryan race, had manifested itself in my house, where I lived. And patriotism, love for our nation, for its freedom, for democracy and justice, had a martyr there. I was shocked and shaken. And even more, sometimes together with my parents, we visited some of these who survived this, and they told these stories, and they showed us the pictures of what had happened to them. But short after this, I think, the same year or the next year, one of these heroes from the war was to be honored, and my father was invited to give a short sermon at this occasion. And I asked him if I could join him. It was also for me quite exciting to listen to these persons themselves, these heroes of war. But then afterwards, my father was very upset. And I had to ask him what was wrong. Well, we had listened to speakers who said, at that time, in 1972, when it was 2 months before the referendum in Norway whether we should join the European Union. Some speakers said, we cannot be in union with the people that humiliated us like this, who even forced us to ask in their language the right to go to the toilet when we were in prison. I have to admit that I understood them very well. I mean, this attitude of fighting was not something that shocked me. In a way, I understood it. They were fighting for justice. But my father challenged me and he said, Olaf, what will happen if we never can leave something behind us? If we never can reconcile with one another again? Even when we know the truth. How will life be if we never move forward? And how can every German man or woman be held accountable for what the military forces of Germany did in our country. Something for an 11-year young boy to think about. And I understood more what he said when we the next year got some visitors from Germany. And then I realized who that was. A friend of my father from 1951, the year he got a scholarship from the World Council of Churches to study 1 year in Belfast in Northern Ireland. He was honored to get a scholarship given to a student from this poor war-ridden Norway. But he got some friends, and one of them was this German friend, who remained his best friend to his death. And then I understood that there is something very human that we have to care for. Something that says ideologies, wars, is about each one of us. And that we have to find a way to reconcile, to find a new way. I think this was also what made my father happy when he attended the installation service in Geneva in 2010. That somehow what he wanted to show me and teach me as a boy had materialized into me taking this responsibility. Well, I will not bother you more about my biography, but I have to say, I realized more and more that experience like this shape our ways of understanding life, but also of understanding faith. And definitely have helped me to understand that love is a huge issue. It's not something superficial. It is also, as a pastor's son who sometimes felt that whatever I should be in my adult life was not to be a pastor, I've realized that it is a huge challenge, but also such a gift, to be called to preach the gospel. And that this gospel actually is about Christ's love, which is a call to serve for the reconciliation of the world. Nothing less. Maybe I project some of my theological reflections later back to these experiences, but I think that is fair enough. But I would say, be aware, children have very serious things to say. And in the program that I'm also involved in, together with other global institutions, how to protect children from violence, we connect our own World Council of Churches program, Churches' Commitment to Children. And one of the objectives in this program is to help children to have a say and to have something to contribute themselves in the church today. In addition to a very, very urgent responsibility for the churches to protect children from violence and abuse. This theme of the upcoming assembly is, as you can hear if you read it and think about it, a kind of paraphrase of a sentence from the St. Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 5. And let me read for you verse 14 and 20. The love of Christ compels us, because we know that one has died for all. Therefore all have died. And he died for all, so that those who live might not live any longer for themselves, but for him who died and was raised for them. So, we are ambassadors for Christ. Since God is making his appeal through us, we entreat you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled with God. One of the theological questions, at least a Lutheran student of theology has to dwell with, is what model is most proper to interpret the death of Christ. I will not go far into that now, but just say, in my reflection about that as a theological student, I found the best answers in this text in the 2 Corinthians 5. And particularly two very important answers to my questions which is relevant for how we understand this theme, is, for the first, that there is a variety of models and images in the New Testament used to try to interpret what Christ's death meant. It's not only one. It's not only one forensic, or one legal, or one cultic dimension. There are many. And actually, there are also many human experiences that can help us to understand what it means. This ultimate love of Jesus Christ is given by God. It is about the new creation, as St. Paul says. And therefore he concludes that all this is from God. Whatever model we use, whatever perspective we put on this mystery of faith, it is all from God. Which again links this to our reflection about God and the world. God and creation. God as the giver of life. And therefore, St. Paul says, he died so that they all died, but he lived so that we all can live, and not live for ourselves. And the other clear message is that there is one motivation, there is one attitude, there is one force that compels us beyond anything else, and that is Christ's love. It changes our relationship to God, it changes our relationship to one another. It's about what it means to be God's creation and God's new creation. One of the many visits I've had the privilege to have to some of our churches was to the churches in Samoa in the Pacific. Well, it's actually far from here, but you are closer to it than we are in Europe. There I learned about a tradition that if anything wrongful was done, even something criminal, the family of the perpetrator had to sit down outside the house of the victim's family, expressing their shame and their guilt together. And they would sit like this until the family of the victim was ready to come out and stretch out their hands and say, we reconcile. Thinking of this, in a society of an island, if revenge would be the principle of how to deal with this, there would not be many left. This is one of the many examples I think we have both in our cultures but also in our churches. How reconciliation, inspired by what was given in Jesus Christ, can find its expressions that can change our realities. So, actually, by choosing this theme for the next assembly, we say it's time to go back. It's back to the basic. Is that a new way of being nostalgic, or saying, okay, the old is the best, let's forget about modernity? I don't think so. It is because we believe that this is what the world needs today. It is not outdated and obsolete to talk about how can we find ways to reconciliation and unity. And we have to say, the world is not today particularly moved by love. But we need love. We have to say even the communities of Christian faith and our churches are sometimes so self-centered by themselves and in themselves that they become sources of division and conflict, even armed conflicts, far beyond their own circles that have this impact. We have to also acknowledge that religion in general is acknowledged as a problem in the world today. The neutral UN institution, neutral in terms of religious affiliation, all come to us and ask, what can we do together? Because religion is a problem, and we have to find a way to make religion also a contribution to peace. It's not the first time in history that religion is a problem. But we have to acknowledge that it is today as well. Therefore, the churches themselves need to reconsider their own relations to themselves and to other peoples of faith. And many churches also actually struggle to find their roles, and many church leaders also find this challenging. How should we in this time be faithful to our identity, to our faith, but still work for reconciliation and unity in the world, not only within the church? When this modern ecumenical movement was organized in the World Council of Churches in 1948, there were strong impulses from theologians like Karl Barth and others who had a very clear focus on Christology as the way to enter into all questions of theology. This is expressed in many very significant texts and reports from 1948 and onwards. But it is a very interesting phenomenon that when we came to 1991 until 2021, Christ is never mentioned in these themes. 1991, in Canberra, Come Holy Spirit, renew the whole creation. In 1998, Turn to God, rejoice in hope. 2006, God in your grace, transform the world. 2013, God of life, lead us to justice and peace. Nothing wrong with these themes, but it's interesting to ask, why is Christ not mentioned as he was in all the former themes, except for the first? And why do we bring Christ back now in the theme? That was actually part of the discussion we had. Shouldn't it say God's love, not Christ's love? Aren't we in an interreligious context where we have to speak in a more open and inclusive way? Whatever we say about God in Christian theology and in a Christian witness and what we claim to be a Christian life, it is defined by how we understand what Christ means. Jesus Christ is a confession. It professes that in the human being Jesus we meet the one that is sent by God. And therefore it caused all these kind of discussions in the first centuries about how can he be both God and human. And somehow these very important discussions came to a conclusion in the Council of Chalcedon in 451. I think it is time to reflect again, not to start again all the Christological discussions, but reflect again what these discussions actually mean for how we understand the relationship between God and the world, between God and human beings, but also between God and God's creation. It affects everything we, as Christians, say about the Trinitarian God. We can, in many ways, learn from what was discussed then, but we have also to ask, what does it mean today when we have to say to love your neighbor as yourself, to love God by your heart and your soul and your mind, must actually also mean that you love creation. If we don't love God's creation, how can we love our neighbor? And how can we love God? What does it mean that God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son? When we reflect about how this all belongs together. Therefore, the relationships of love that are expressed in faith, in our faith in Jesus Christ, as one of the three persons in God, is also the relationships that are modeling our fellowship. And this is wonderfully expressed in one text that is very often used as the basis for the modern ecumenical movement, the 17th chapter of the Gospel of John, where there is a wonderful, wonderful poem, actually, prayer, Jesus' prayer to his Father, where, in a way, the key is what the Orthodox have helped us to understand. Namely, the key is the word hos, or translated into English, such as. That them all may be all one, such as you and me, Father, are one. That they may remain in your love, as such as I remain in you. These different parallel expressions flows together. But the key that brings them together is this such as. The relationship between Jesus, his Father, is the way we can understand what Christian unity is. Namely, a fellowship of love. It inspires, it encourages, it empowers us as churches to say that the good news is something for the whole world. It's not for the club. It is for God's love to the world. In our discussions in the Central Committee of the WCC, when we discussed this theme, I heard very interesting voices. Some was from the Global South, who said, yes, let us have this as the theme. Because finally we can express the gospel in the theme. The gospel that we received and that we gratefully received and also want to bring back to the churches in Europe who brought this gospel to us. Some said it is very appropriate because we need a language that young people of today would have some affiliation to. Others said it's a challenge if we relate this to our interfaith dialogues. And then others said exactly because of that we should use the language of Christ's love. Another example for me that makes this true. We have many relationships in the World Council of Churches, and one of them that are particularly challenging, but also I think very important, is to North and South Korea. And for more than 30 years, the WCC has brought representatives from both these parts of Korea together to talk about how is it possible to bring a vision for peace for the people of Korea into something concrete. And we have had the opportunity to visit both, but also to visit Pyongyang. We visited in May last year, immediately after this first summit between the North and the South, as the first international delegation. And we discussed what should be the gift. Because on these kind of visits, you have to bring a gift to the supreme leader, to the chairman. And I convinced my colleagues that this time we should bring an icon of Jesus Christ. Not a pen or a sign of WCC or something like that, but an icon. They were a bit nervous because you have to present it and describe very officially why you want to give this. What is the meaning of the gift? Even in writing. When I presented it, I said, this is the Prince of Peace. This is who gave us our vision and our inspiration to work with you for peace. And it was understood. It was received with great appreciation. It was another sign for me that it's not time to say something else, but to say this is our faith, and this is why we do what we do. We have said that together with the Pontifical Council for Promoting Interreligious Dialogue and the World Evangelical Alliance in a document called Christian Witness in a Multi-Religious World. We work on another document these days related to the same themes. We have to find ways to present our Christian faith by saying we believe in Jesus Christ. And for the ecumenical dialogue itself, it's important to be reminded that when St. Paul says in the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 2, that for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. He say that to unite them, not to say some of you are excluded. It sounds exclusive, but he says this is the only way to unite the church. And in some of our traditions there is also a saying from John Chrysostom, as far as I know, that Christ on the cross stretches out his arms to the whole world. That is why Christ, and only Christ, can bring us together. So, as a WCC, we go in different phases. In the last period since our assembly in Busan, we have focused on saying that we are together on a pilgrimage of justice and peace. And we have reflected, like in this mission conference, how is this to be expressed in being disciples of Christ, following Christ in humility, but with a purpose. To show that uniqueness of God and God's love is this being for others, as Bonhoeffer in a very significant way expressed it. This radical being for others is always a challenge for us, particularly a challenge also to those who want to glorify their own name, showing their potential, their pride, and their power. But it is also a challenge for us in the ecumenical movement as we come with our different interests, and some ask, it was interesting some years ago, but what's in it for us now? That's a very un-Christian question. It's normal, but it is not what it means to be a disciple. That means to be a disciple is to ask what is here that we can contribute as followers of Christ today. Therefore, in my report to the Cell Committee last year, I said, let us talk about the ecumenical movement of love. Let us use this term. As we have learned from the Faith Nordic studies about koinonia, about this fellowship, participation in God's love, let us try to materialize it in how we organize and how we prioritize our work in the one ecumenical movement. We could, in many ways, say that this is another expression of being the ecumenical movement of the cross. Reminding ourselves that the criteria for whether we do what we do is not only when we have wind in our sails, but when we do what is right, even if it is something that causes sacrifices. But when we use this terminology of love again, we also benefit from many dimensions of our ecumenical legacy. For example, what is almost a new ecumenical doctrine, that there has to be the preferential option for the poor in the way we understand our own priorities. It is a way to express God's love for the world today. Another text from the Gospel of John, which I think helps me a lot to understand what the 17th chapter actually says, is the last chapter, chapter 21. When these disillusioned fishermen came back to the shore, and there is somebody there, they don't recognize who he is immediately, who invite them to eat and to bring what they have to the meal. And they understand who it is, and then there is this dialogue, I mean, almost interrogation between Jesus and Peter. Simon, son of John, do you love me? 3 times. And we have to say this question about love doesn't bring us the idea about sentimentality and emotional self-preoccupation. It is a very, very deep question, but a very tough question. But it is the question that opens again the relationship that was broken. The unity that they all may be one has to come through this question. And the answer. But then the follow-up of the answer. Yes, you know that I love you. And then the answer is, feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. You must then give. You must give. That is the way you express the love to me, as Jesus. There is. For me, this has been a great inspiration to think our ministry, whether it is as a local parish pastor or as a general secretary of the World Council of Churches or whatever we are, is our response to this question. Do you love me? So do it. Do it. Show it. To the youth, to the young children, to the elder people, to whoever. Whoever needs to see a sign of Christ's love. But you have to say, there is no sense in talking about an ecumenical movement to love if we think that we are not in need of it ourselves. Then we became again something, I would say, useless. But Jesus Christ did not ask for perfectionism, but asked for honesty and love. And the world is not in need of perfectionism, but it is desperately in need of love. So, this has to do with our attitudes, our firm positions, not only our emotional ups and downs or attractions, but our firm positions, expressed in attitudes of love, of mutual accountability, of openness, reliability, faithfulness, that also can lead to self-criticism, proper self-criticism, and therefore also to transformation. And I see this way of talking about love as an attitude of mutual accountability, as a quality of our relations, needed in a fellowship of diversity, is what we need in the ecumenical movement, to be what they're called to be. It's not only about being soft and gentle, which we also need, but sometimes also to say no, not only to say yes. And sometimes I wonder why we are not able to embrace more of this diversity among us as human beings, particularly in the church, when we are all here because of Christ's love for us. Why should we not be able to understand that as the way we are together, with our diversities, with our differences, with our different ethnicities, but all kinds of categories we can use? And why is difference so dividing for the church? That's really one of the paradoxes in our time. Still, we don't give up. We believe that love is the better way, as St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13. There is a way of love that we can pursue, even if we are not able to do everything we should. We don't give up. And therefore we believe that there is a church, a one church for one humanity, and that it can find new expressions through the ecumenical movement and in many other ways, but particularly also through the calling we have as a World Council of Churches. This interconnectedness of unity, of justice, and of peace, hold together in love, I believe is the core mission of the World Council of Churches. And then, in a way, I refer back to the question I had as a 10-year-old boy. How can unity, justice, and peace and love come together? And more I find that the answer is in Christ, and that the realpolitik of the church therefore must be to express love. The power of love is a message to the world. And we cannot leave this quest for unity on a sidetrack and say, okay, we did it some decades ago, now we do something else. Therefore, I very much appreciate your initiatives here to say there are a lot to do in this agenda for unity. But maybe the questions are not the same as before. But the objective and the vision and the call is the same. Let me conclude by saying they said never again in 1948. The WCC was involved in a project in Brazil some years ago that had the name Brasil Nunca Mais. Brazil, never again. It was to collect documentation of the human rights violations of a lot of people in Brazil under the military regime. Together with the Catholic Archbishop of São Paulo, one of our colleagues were able to bring these documents that was copied by a lawyer secretly during the nights out of Brazil and stored them in Geneva in our archives. 4 years ago, I brought a copy of all these documents back to Brazil and handed it over to the chief the chief attorney of São Paulo, and he promised this should be part of our truth and reconciliation process. Last week we read that the new president of Brazil wants to celebrate the military coup that led to the military regime in Brazil. That gives me a very strong message. We have to say again and again, never again. We have to continue our fight for human rights, for human dignity, for the love that is expressed also in these ways of working for the one human family. So if there are strong powers undermining the need to see one another as participants in this one humanity, we are seeking our common ground and actually our common interests. There needs to be somebody and something that represents a counterside and a counterweight, really, of unity, of justice and peace. And that has to be expressed in non-partisan, universal love. We can make a difference as people of faith, of hope and love. And therefore we believe that Christ's love can move the world and even ourselves. Thank you.
Many thanks, Olaf. And now I invite our distinguished panelists to reflect on this presentation. Those are Bishop Marianne Svensson, a Methodist bishop, and she's also actively involved in the work of the World Council of Churches. She is a vice moderator of the WCC, right? And please join us. And Father Alexei Smith, who is an ecumenical officer for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, and he's also a member of our advisory board at Huffington Ecumenical Institute. So please, the floor is yours. In the meantime, please, if you have questions, write them down and give them to Margaret. She will collect them. Just raise your hand and she will pick them up. Please.
Ladies first.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Oh. Well, it is very much a privilege for me to be with you on this significant event tonight because it really is a time, I think, when the Christian community can come together and to reflect together on our ministry of reconciliation. And also that you have been willing here tonight, all of you who have come and those of you who are a part of LMU, to invite leaders from the World Council of Churches as we do prepare now for the next Worldwide Assembly. And I'm so glad that Olaf has talked about it. And he mentioned a little about the writing of Paul in that second letter to the Corinthian church, and how that's there is so much in that 5th chapter that's really appropriate for the theme of the assembly. And I'll say a couple of more things about that in a few moments. But I want to take a moment first, while the General Secretary is here, to share with you some of what's been so important for me journeying with him in these last few years, leading up to what now becomes the theme that he addresses. These last few years, we really have been walking together, walking and praying and working together, serving and healing and reconciling and transforming and uniting, walking together for justice and peace. And I'm really moved by it because what we've tried to do, in my understanding of it, is travel in this pilgrimage of justice and peace to wounded places in the world. And so in many ways, I see the work of the World Council of Churches being a ministry of accompaniment. So we go to places in the world that are wounded and try to work together for healing and wholeness. And we've gone to so many places. He mentioned how we have worked for so long on the Korean Peninsula and tried to bring peace there. I was really moved by a story about the icon and taking the Jesus Christ icon in some of that work on the peninsula. We, of course, have been in the Holy Land and continue to work for peace in the Middle East. We have been in Cyprus and have worked with Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots, trying to bring together the people in Cyprus. We've been in Colombia, working on the peace processes in Colombia, and in South Sudan, and in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Made a trip to Hiroshima and Nagasaki on an anniversary of the atomic bomb, trying to say no more nuclear weapons, let us have peace and work together for peace. And he didn't mention this part to you, but they've even been coming to the United States to assist us in our issues of racism and violence. So it really has been a ministry of accompaniment that the World Council of Churches has done for people who are wounded in so many places in the world. And so it's a perfect movement then from this assembly where we had a prayer, God of life, lead us to justice and peace, for us now then to move into the theme, to be truly expressing ourselves as a fellowship of love, and to live as a fellowship of love, and to witness that. And he quoted the passage from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians that we will use as part of our passage on this theme as we work towards it. And we were having an executive committee meeting in the World Council of Churches not long ago, and we had a really interesting discussion, I thought, about the verb. I was glad Olaf talked to you a little bit about the question when we talked about, we're going to talk about Christ's love or God's love, and how we settled on talking about Christ's love. But we also had some conversation about the verb, and we're using Christ moves the world. But, the scripture itself, in one of the translations, says, the love of Christ compels us. The love of Christ compels us. And a few years ago, for our week of prayer for Christian unity, that was the theme that we had. And we worked on that here in Los Angeles and talked about the love of Christ compels us. But one of the translations I saw was the love of Christ controls us. And then another was talking about how it's really Christ's love that dominates us. And it's not an external law, it is an internal love. It is a pouring of the heart. And it is this whole sense of the internal love that is so powerful to dominate us in our lives. So all of our lives is about love of God and neighbor, and then our transformative action on behalf of the world. And our Methodist heritage with John Wesley is knowing that our mission in life as a Christian person is to try to become more perfect in love of God and neighbor. And we talk about going on to perfection, and that's a sense of a calling for us. And the way in which he expressed it tonight, I would say, is we want to go forward as a fellowship of love. Let us become more perfect in loving God and neighbor and all of creation. As you talked about creation, truly all of creation is a part of our neighborhood. And the power of Christ's love moving the world moves us truly then to the transformative action for reconciliation in the world. So thank you so much for the ways in which you have shared this with us, and it really does help to lead us forward as we look now to the future and the love of Christ.
Thank you, Bishop Swinson. May I first take the opportunity to include in the welcome the representative of His Grace, Archbishop Moshe Martirosyan from the Armenian Prelacy of the Armenian Church. And also, I believe we have several delegates from the Ethiopian Church here.
Wonderful.
So let's give them a warm
Yes,
welcome.
wonderful. And I was going to mention that, and it's really the interfaith community as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I guess I was shocked to hear that the word love and the word Christ have not appeared in the title of any
That's
World Council
surprising.
of Churches.
Christ.
Yes. I was a bit taken aback by that, especially when Jesus himself tells us that men and women will know that we are his disciples
Yes, by our love. By our
the
love.
way we love one another. So we have something to work on there. We certainly have something to work on. I also certainly identify with what you said, and you and I discussed this briefly yesterday, about Christians need not and absolutely must not hide the fact that we are Christian. And I gave you the example of when at our cathedral downtown, the Our Lady of the Angels Cathedral, when we had an interfaith service as part of the dedication. And I was working in those days with a committee. I don't work with committees anymore. Excepting this committee, of course. There were Catholics on that committee who said, because we're going to be having people of other faiths, not Christian faiths, present, that we should remove the crucifix. And I said, why? Because some people find it offensive. But that's who we are.
Amen.
Paul tells us that our preaching is in vain unless we preach Christ and Him crucified.
That's right.
So I think that's important for us as Christians. Ideally, all Christians together should be able to boldly, being respectful of other faiths, non-Christian faiths, but boldly proclaim who we are and in whom we believe. Certainly, I also resonated with what I believe Pope Francis said at the 70th anniversary of the World Council of Churches, that we need to be walking and praying and working together. We need to concentrate on what we as Christians can do together and not always focus on, oh, but we can't do this or we can't do that. We need to focus on what we can do and should be doing together, not only at the World Council, but here in Los Angeles. I think we also, one of the things that we can be doing together, and which I fear we're afraid to do, is to hold each other to the task, to hold each other's feet to the fire, and hold each other accountable for the ways in which we have perhaps offended our fellow Christians in the past. I was very moved by Pope Francis a few years ago at the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity service in St. John Lateran Basilica there in Rome, where he apologized on behalf of the Catholic Church for any way in which we have injured or harmed or offended our fellow Christians. And I think we need to do more than simply apologize. I think we have to call out those ways that we have offended one another in order to move on. We can't stay, I love the story about, do we stay victimized or do we move on to reconciliation? And we're not going to move on to reconciliation by just lightly papering over it. We have to really enter into the whole Christian concept of forgiveness and then live that forgiveness. I'm not so sure I agreed with you when you said that religion is a problem. I think religion can be a problem. I don't think it automatically is a problem. I think it can be a problem the way it's utilized or employed by people. So I think we have to be very conscious of that. We certainly have any number of examples of that in our own country. And I love what you said then, that it was time to again reflect on Chalcedon. I would like you to know that our Southern California Christian Forum, the Faith and Order Commission of the Southern California Christian Forum, recently did that. We spent a year looking at that whole controversy, and we had presentations from the Oriental Orthodox, from the Catholics, and from the Protestant viewpoints on that, to just see where people were coming from and how we might rediscover that interaction between the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit as a fellowship of love, as a model then for our own working together as fellow Christians here in Los Angeles. I think there's much more I could say, but I think people are willing, and they've come here to hear you, not us.
That's right.
So let's have the questions, Father,
yeah.
and we'll go on from there. Thank you very much.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you.
Many thanks to our panelists. We've got quite a few questions, and some of those questions, I believe, have been answered already by the panelists. Some of those questions overlap with one another. So we will ask a few questions from this bunch of them. But before that, I'd like to acknowledge another presence among us. It's Bishop Abraham from the Coptic Diocese here in Los Angeles. Welcome, and it's a joy that you are with us. Your praise. So the first question would be, what is the relation between the theme for the global assemblies and the activities of local ecumenical organizations? It is directly related to the topic of the presentation. Could you answer?
To some extent that is for me to answer, to some extent that's for you to answer. I think, as an example, that the theme we had in the 10th Assembly and this focus on being together on a pilgrimage of justice and peace has found a lot of local expressions. One was the many ways of actually doing pilgrimages before this very important meeting in Paris in 2015, December 2015, for the climate. And there were 2 million signatures handed over to that conference by these pilgrims who had come from countries all over Europe, but also far beyond. That was one way to mobilize through a theme new creativity, but also new expressions of what this could mean in practice. There have been other themes. I think, for example, when we were in Vancouver in 1983, Jesus Christ, the light of the world, had quite an impact on many discussions, but also hymn writers and others around the world, but also bringing, at that point, the indigenous people's reality into the fellowship. Maybe it's not the theme alone, but what the event meant. And since then, there has been a totally different awareness that indigenous peoples belong to the churches, they're not just somebody else. And that their concerns and rights, of course, are our concerns, but they also have a lot to contribute. So that's one way to answer these questions.
Good. Thank you. Then another question is, since Bishop Svensson mentioned that the WCC has accompanied the church in the US facing issues of international justice, as one who is not from the USA, what do you see that we in this country ought to learn in order to work on the in overcoming racism in the United States?
I didn't hear the very end of that.
Yes. What?
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first thing I need to say was one of my learnings after that experience of people from the WCC coming to the U.S. To be with us and to journey with us on a pilgrimage to different places. We went to Charleston, we went to St. Louis, we were in Chicago, and we heard many different voices. But what happened after that was people in the leadership in ecumenical work in the United States felt like our brothers and sisters from other parts of the world really heard and saw the needs in our country in a new way and really were truly walking with us. You know, it's true that racism is America's original sin. And we have such deep problems in our racism that interacts like a cancer and a virus that affects everything in our national life. And until we find our way to really work together and to move together to change it, we will not become the people of this country that really God wants us to be. So we're desperately in need of Christ's love moving the world to reconciliation and unity here in North America. And one of the things that I participated in was a panel event in Geneva about racism and xenophobia in the world and Afrophobia and how to overcome that. And it occurred to me how different are our issues in the United States with our sisters and brothers just to the north in Canada. And they have issues too, but ours are really deeper and different here in the United States. And I don't know how we're going to solve it, I really don't. But it is our prayer and our receiving the witness from brothers and sisters in other places. You know, I really believe our brothers and sisters in Hawaii are doing a lot better job than those of us in the mainland are doing in terms of how to live together and how to truly honor one another and our diversity. And I think we could simply learn from our own neighbors in our efforts to love, and we could change our racist ways if we would.
Good, thank you. The next question is, it goes to Olaf, what can the ecumenical movement of churches do to effectively address the growing environmental concerns facing the world? What role the church take to facilitate and encourage change among the human choices regarding the environment?
I touched it in my reflections, and I can, for example, remind you that before the UN started to hold its big conference about climate change, the WCC brought representatives from the Pacific Islands to our meetings to tell us what is actually going on. So it has been an opportunity since the very beginning to say, actually, because we belong to one another's churches, we also have an opportunity to understand what's going on and also to say, well, we have to share this as a responsibility, as a global responsibility. It's not the responsibility of the people in Tuvalu that they have these problems. It is something we have to share because they are the less responsible for it. So that is about bringing information, but also bringing an ethos into this that say we have to share the responsibility, and particularly those who have done the most. So bringing contribution to the moral discourse, which is about personal moral, but it's also about moral aspects of politics and investments and all these dimensions of what's possible change. I've been encouraged to see that what we did before Paris 2015 and what we've been doing in every one of these COP meetings have created also an ear among many both in the UN system but also in many governments, that, well, we're actually not dealing only with technical issues or scientific issues or financial issues. It's really a spiritual issue.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I just add quickly?
Yes, sure.
Certainly, Pope Francis's wonderful encyclical Laudato Si gives great credit to the ecumenical patriarch's leadership in all of this, and it pledges and challenges the whole world, Christian and non-Christian, to join in the struggle for reclaiming the environment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And probably, if I may ask the last question, because we run out of time, and it's not an easy question. It's about the genocide in Yemen, which treats children with famine and disease. How can the partnership, probably the organization of which you are a member, can end the violence against children in Yemen and elsewhere? What would be your answer?
I wish we had an answer to that.
Yeah.
I think many, also international organizations, not only religious organizations, are feeling that they are really not able to address the situation in Yemen properly. In one way, it is more of an issue for Muslims, because this is particularly their part of the world, to address. But even for them, it's very difficult to find the ways to do it. I think attention and, of course, if possible, how we, through our organizations, ecumenical organizations of humanitarian aid and so on, can bring contributions. But we know that this war is also about very complicated politics. Sometimes we have that kind of influence. Sometimes we realize we cannot give up. There must be a sense of caring for the most vulnerable in Yemen that really also come to a change. And I'm glad the question is asked and remind us again about this tragedy and other tragedies where children are those who most often are the victims of war that suffers the most. Because they not only suffer when the war is happening, but they carry with them this experience the whole life.
Many thanks. I think we need to thank all our panelists and for addressing our concerns and also answering our questions. And now, at the conclusion, I'd like to invite Michael Huffington to say a few words from his own. And Mike, please.
Before we wrap up, I just wanted to offer a gift on behalf of the Huffington Ecumenical Institute in Loyola Marymount to you, Olaf, for being here and traveling all this way and starting our first series of lectures. It's a real honor to have met you and spent some time with you at dinner. So this is from us to you, with love.
Very good.
And we thank you. It's hopefully you can use it. It's a clock with a wonderful inscription, which hopefully you'll remember us when you get back to Norway. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. It's on Pacific Standard Time. I want to thank all the hierarchs and pastors and priests who joined us from the different Christian denominations and our friends from the Jewish community and anyone else who may be here from whether it's the Muslim community or even agnostics. The key to what was said tonight is the word love. That should be a universal term in every religion, or even among those who are not religious. And I think it actually gets down to, first of all, loving ourselves. If every human being could know themselves and love themselves, I doubt there would really be war. It would end jealousy, anger, hate. But the key is to love yourself, and that's why, especially for the students here, it's not something normally that you're taught. You're taught more usually English and history and science. But the most important thing in the world truly is love. And beyond that, forgiveness. If you can forgive people, you don't carry that poison in your system anymore. So I think this has been a wonderfully enlightening inaugural lecture and discussion. I want to thank all of you for being part of this, and thank all of you for joining us. And then I would also say one last thing. We have all these wonderful leaders of different churches here with us tonight. If LMU could get each of your names and numbers to each one of you, and perhaps you could invite us to your church or your cathedral, and let us start mixing here in Los Angeles. Let this be the incubator to bring change to the world.
Amen.
Amen is a
Amen.
great word. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Thank you.